What comes to mind when you hear the word stress? Do you feel that you're experiencing too much of it? Are you wondering what are some of the ways that you can reduce it? I'm Grace Trafton of The Better Part. Stay tuned and hear what our guest has to say about this universal condition. Dr. Julie Forbes is an educator, consultant, and facilitator who is currently teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. Dr. Forbes has also worked in the computer industry for many years. She holds a BS degree in materials engineering from Brown University and an MA and PhD from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, which is now Sophia University. Now, you're teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. Tell us, what exactly is mindfulness?
So, if I can try to describe it as simply as possible, mindfulness is actually cultivating a quality of attention. And that quality of attention is bringing our awareness in contact with our experience that's occurring now, right in the moment. Because most of us, our attention is captivated by everything external to us, demands, emails, conversation, worries, memories. We're just captivated, and our attention is in so many numerous places, but rarely recognizing what's actually occurring now. So the real skill of developing mindfulness is to learn how to cultivate that quality of awareness that is in touch with what's actually happening now.
So that would be useful for conducting a TV show.
It's useful universally, and you know why? Because the key about developing that quality of attention is it actually, instead of reacting automatically to all the stimulation that's abundant in our everyday life, when you're actually mindful, even for a moment here or there, you get a choice of how to respond to what your experience is, rather than let these automatic systems that are ingrained in us, these habitual, conditioned, and physiological systems take over. And it lets us make choices about how to have an improved relationship with our experience.
So that would be the goal of mindfulness. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. It actually ultimately is to let us develop a way to improve the quality of our experience, rather than just have the wear and tear of everyday life dominate.
With our very busy lives these days, though, how can we find time to practice mindfulness?
You know, that's always the biggest challenge for most people who take on this practice. So that's a ubiquitous challenge that we all have. So the first thing is, I recommend that people learn to practice with other people in a group or at a center, because a lot of people try to read books, try to listen to things online, and they learn the intellectual concepts, but it's very hard to learn the experiential practice all on your own. So the first thing is, I recommend that people find a way to learn it with other people, and perhaps with someone who's really experienced, and then grapple with that challenging aspect of how to carve out time for something that we already feel that our plate is overfull.
Right, exactly. So since, we're in such a stressful environment these days, is stress a normal response to negative stimulation?
Stress is absolutely a normal response, and it's actually built into us as beings on this planet.
Is that the fight or flight response?
It is. It's our fight or flight response. And that's something that we physiologically share with all beings, not only human beings, but all beings, all the way down through reptiles have this fight or flight mechanism. And that's how we exist today on this planet, is that we have this survival mechanism that was designed to help us survive any potential threat. And it's working because we're here,
right?
But the part that we're understanding is that it's also taking a huge toll on us in the process that doesn't have to take place if we start recognizing what's actually going on and making different choices instead of letting this automatic fight or flight system engage and drive our everyday reactivity.
In our everyday activities, we could experience a huge amount of stress if we're stuck in traffic on our way to work.
Traffic
right?
is getting to be one of the biggest complaints of all the clients I work with, even whether they come with physical distress or family distress or emotional distress. Traffic is a common one.
So the fight or flight response could work negatively rather than help us in situations such as that, right?
It's this built-in system that's there to help us survive. Wasn't designed for the kind of lifestyle we're living. So in actuality, moment to moment, it's actually taking a big toll on us, both physically and emotionally and interpersonally. And so learning mindfulness skills gives us another alternative. So when we're in these same situations like traffic where we don't have control,
right,
or other situations we can discuss, instead of just being a victim to the situation and reacting out of the hormones and the tension and the emotional anger that we're experiencing, we have other alternatives that actually help us have a better experience in something we have no control over.
Now, is stress always bad for us?
You know, stress has a purpose, and that survival mechanism is there for a good reason that sometimes really does come into play in a positive way. And so sometimes the systems that engage in our body when we're in fight or flight can help us respond more quickly or be stronger in situations where we need to be stronger, or maybe not avoid things that have to be dealt with. So there are positive aspects to that stressor, that stress reactivity we have. But what's happening is it's become run amok, and it's the positive aspects are being outweighed by the negative toll because of the amount of time we spend in stress arousal, which in our human lives, for all intents and purposes, we're in a state of stress arousal from the moment we wake up till the moment we go to sleep. And that's not how this mechanism was designed. We were supposed to come back to balance when the stressor was over. And we just have one stressor after the next, whether it's email or a thought or a demand or a phone call or a deadline. So we weren't designed, our bodies weren't designed to stay in that kind of stress arousal.
So throughout our history, stress has always been there, but now in the 21st century, it sounds like we might have more stress today than in the past. Is that right?
Well, what I will say is we have more stimulation, and our bodies don't know the difference between one stimulation over another. So, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, if we were coming up against an animal that could be a threat, our stress reactivity was an appropriate response. But in our 21st century, our body doesn't distinguish between an email coming in or a phone call or having a deadline as opposed to an animal attacking us. So the trouble is we have pretty much constant stimulation, and our body interprets every one of those as potential threat. And so that's really what causes us to experience more stress than perhaps in the past, where some of those stressors were actually life and death. Now our stressors are less often life or death, but our body reacts the same way nonetheless.
Do individuals vary significantly to their response to stress?
You know, each of us has some very common ways that we uniquely, individually react to stress, so that if you and I were in the same situation, you might respond very differently than I do. But there are some very common general human reactions that may come into play over time. It's just that for the same stressor, you may have different ones than I at that same time. So we all have physiological symptoms that arise. And you might recognize in your body what some of those are, and they might be different than I. Like you might get tension in your shoulders, while I might clench my jaw or hold my breath. So we might have different physiological symptoms. And then we all have interpersonal reactions. Some people lash out, others withdraw, or variations on that theme. And then we all have cognitive reactions, and those are our thoughts. And each of us has our own unique inner dialogue that has developed over our lifetimes. And we have specific patterns of thought that we might be prone to.
Now, are there ways that we can break those patterns of thought that, as you said, we've developed through a lifetime, and some of those may be counterproductive to us?
Absolutely. But it's not easy. And that's why mindfulness is such a helpful foundation, because what mindfulness helps us do is it helps us become more familiar with our own flavors of reactivity. And it's not fun to become familiar with our reactions and our thoughts and our emotions, but the value of doing that is the more familiar I can become with them, the more options I have for working with those more effectively. So if I recognize a pattern of thought that I get into, maybe I catastrophize, and I say, well, what if this? What if that? And I recognize, oh, that's me, I'm catastrophizing, then I actually no longer have to be controlled by that catastrophizing thought. I can say, that's just a catastrophizing thought. Maybe this isn't happening now, and I don't have to react that way. So recognizing what's actually happening gives us some influence over it.
How do we recognize those those situations?
So in the mindfulness philosophy, we develop a practice where we get the opportunity to turn inward, to pay more attention to our own experiences as they're occurring. And that ability to become more intimate with our own experience and get to know ourselves better gives us the opportunity to learn ways to respond with that awareness. So there are various forms of practicing mindfulness, but what they all have in common is this way of turning inward instead of letting our attention be pulled outward, so that we have understanding and insight into our own experience and reactivity, so that we can learn ways to say, oh, there's an alternative to this. I can make a different choice. I don't have to let this drive me.
That's something that really needs to have lots of practice, right?
Lots of practice. And that's why mindfulness, it sounds like an easy concept when people listen to a podcast or read a book on it. But actually, it's a very challenging practice because it requires ongoing practice.
For the rest of your life?
Well, I liken it very much like we discuss exercise. When we discuss taking on a lifestyle change like exercise, people don't say, well, I'm just going to go do some strength training for 3 weeks and then I'm done, right? Did it, been there, done that. We recognize that, well, if I'm going to go do some cardiovascular exercise or strength training, it's actually an ongoing process. If I do some, work on a treadmill, 3 days a week for 5 weeks, and then I say I'm done, my cardiovascular levels will resort back to where they originated.
Right.
Well, mindfulness is a similar process. It's just instead of working with the heart or our muscles in our body, we're actually working on neural pathways in our brain. But in a very similar way, it's an ongoing journey. So if I start practicing and I notice positive impacts, what I might also notice is if I fall off the wagon and don't practice anymore, that those benefits start to wane.
Just like in exercise.
Just like in exercise.
So tell us, what are some of the negative effects of stress? I think you've mentioned a lot of it, but tell us again.
So the negative impacts do occur in what we like to talk about 4 basic regions of our experience: physiological, interpersonal, emotional, and cognitive. But each person can be affected in one area more than another. So when I have clients either coming to class or working with me individually or in a corporate environment, they're usually focusing on something that has hit a threshold in their life. So maybe it's physiologically. Maybe they're getting to a point where either the pain or diseases that have come into their life are causing them some stress that's turning into being a problem for their quality of life. But sometimes it's the stress that can cause those physiological distress. So either way, they've hit a threshold of some problematic quality of life and or high functioning in their life. And that can be physiological. For other people, it can be emotional. It can be anxiety, panic attacks, depression. For other people, it can be interpersonal. It can be having trouble working with coworkers, experiencing road rage, not being able to relate in a family. And so the stress has hit a threshold and they want to work on improving that quality. And for other people, it's the thoughts. Many of us, our thoughts are so consuming that people can't sleep at night, or people can't focus at work, or people can't have a conversation and even hear another person because their thoughts are so preoccupying.
Right.
So the toll that stress can take can happen in any of those areas of our life or multiple areas. But the thing we're concerned about is when it becomes problematic and interferes with your quality of life or your high functioning. That's when we're
Now,
concerned.
are there ways that we can manage this natural stress response so that it doesn't have all these negative effects on us?
Absolutely. And like what I like to talk about are 2 approaches. There is the reactive approach where you're already in some stress arousal and you want some tools to break out of that stress arousal and what we call come back to balance or homeostasis, where you're more effective. And then the other form of tool are the proactive tools, where I'm going to develop these tools and work with them so that I develop more resilience and am less often falling into a state of stress reactivity where the toll develops in a negative way. So we can use tools and develop a toolkit that are both reactive to break out of the stress when we're in it and proactive to minimize the level of stress that develops.
Now, you've told me that deep breathing can help to turn off this stress response. Can you give us a demonstration?
Absolutely. And you know, the first thing I like to do with people is teach them simple breathing practices, because although my foundation is working with mindfulness, in order to really develop mindfulness, it helps to not be in a heightened state of stress arousal. And we actually have some tools using breathing practices that can physiologically tell our body that we do not need to be in stress arousal right now, that we're safe, and therefore it helps us turn off all the stress arousal systems in our body. And this is physiological, and the breathing practices engage that physiology in our body to do that for us.
So why don't you go ahead and give me a demonstration.
So the first thing I want you to know is that the most important part of the breathing practice is to not worry so much about how you are inhaling.
Oh.
But to really emphasize and notice how you are exhaling.
Okay.
Okay? So the simplest way is to learn how to exhale completely. Okay? So what I want you to do, in fact, while we're sitting here, is put your hand on your abdomen, because it might give you a little bit of feedback that helps you know you're doing this. And I don't want you to worry about how you're breathing in. It can be through your nose, through your mouth, deep, shallow, but you do have to breathe in. So go ahead and breathe in, but as you exhale, what I want you to do is I want you to deliberately exhale and keep exhaling until there's absolutely nothing left to breathe out.
Okay.
Okay? So you go ahead and breathe in, and then exhale. And you're going to think you're done exhaling, but I want you to keep exhaling until there's absolutely nothing left. And if you can notice it all while you do that, notice your breath comes in all on its own.
Right.
See how you don't have to worry about the inhalation?
Right.
So if you exhale completely, you might notice that there's a contraction happening in your abdomen. Your abdomen's deflating a little bit, falling back toward your spine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you want to feel while you're exhaling. You want to exhale until you feel that. And then physiologically what's happening is when your abdomen is contracting like that, your diaphragm is expanding. And it expands to a point where it engages a nerve in your body called the vagus nerve, V-A-G-U-S. And that vagus nerve is what actually turns off all the stress arousal systems in your body.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So by doing this exhalation so completely that we're contracting the abdomen, we're letting our body physiologically know that we're safe, and it turns off all that stress arousal.
Oh, I see. That's very interesting.
And you'll notice, as you notice, that you exhale completely, but the inhalation, it takes care of itself.
Right, it comes naturally.
So all you really need to do is 2 or 3 times in a row, you exhale in this manner.
I see. Now, you have also said that progressive muscle relaxation is another process that can turn off the stress arousal response. So can you tell us briefly about that?
Yes, the progressive muscle relaxation. What we're doing in progressive muscle relaxation is we're deliberately tensing muscle in each part of our body sequentially, whether we start at the top or the bottom. Let's say if we start at the bottom, we tense the muscles in our feet. And while we're tensing the muscles in our feet deliberately, we want to bring our awareness to that. Notice, this is what it feels like to have my feet in a state of tension. And then after just a few seconds of noticing that, you breathe in, you exhale, and you see if you can release that tension in that part of your body. And then you go to another part of your body, let's say the lower legs, and you do the same thing. And you sequentially go through the different sets of muscles in your body. And what that does is, first of all, if you are in any tension, which most of us, if we're in any stress arousal, are holding tension, by doing that process, you do get to release the tension in your body. Mm-hmm. And secondly, as you pay attention to your muscle in tension and then release, you become more familiar with what it feels like for your body to be in tension and then in a state of relaxation, so that you can become more aware of when you are getting tense and know that, here I am in tension, and have the opportunity to release. So it does 2 things. It just physiologically lets you release tension. Mm-hmm. But as you're doing so, you are really becoming more familiar with how you experience your body in tension so that you can catch it more often. And when you catch it, then you have the opportunity to say, oh, I'm holding tension. Let me let that go. And a lot of people find that this helps them sleep better, because many people, when they lie down to go to bed at night, are still in a state of tension and stress arousal.
Right, exactly.
And many people I work with do this process and say, wow, I can finally go to sleep because I didn't even realize that I was holding so much tension, and they're in a state that's more conducive to sleep. So whether it's paying attention to work and releasing the tension so you can do that, or having a better chance at falling asleep at night, the progressive muscle relaxation is a very effective process.
Yeah, sounds like it would be.
Yeah.
Now, are there preventive steps that we can take to keep our bodies in balance so that we don't even go into this stress arousal state so often?
Well, that's really what the core of my teaching is. And the core of what I teach through my mindfulness programs really has to do with developing meditation practice and or yoga practice in a mindful way, so that we can learn how to stay in a greater state of balance and less often go into a state of stress arousal. So meditation practice, and particularly mindfulness meditation, is a way that we teach people proactive measures to reduce and maintain a state of greater balance day to day, so that we less often are going into arousal to the stimulation that's inevitable in our lives.
Right. Well, Julie, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. It's been very, very helpful.
Oh, I appreciate being here. I'm glad to do this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grace.
I hope you've enjoyed our program today, and I hope that you'll be able to experience a little less stress in your life. Thanks to Dr. Julie Forbes. Please be sure to also watch us on YouTube and Roku. See you next time. Bye-bye.